Welcome to this Liberstoria lecture on the history of dreams, the history of dream interpretation. When we're talking about dreams, we're talking about something that has existed in a profound sense since the beginning of our human existence. There has always been a question about reality and about dreams. And in this first section here, I want to show you a few texts from anthropologists and from thinkers who have discussed this idea of how we dream in this ancient sense, the traditional sense, the tribal sense. And what we'll find is that in many of those traditional societies, a dream and reality had no separation. A dream was just as valid as reality to understand the things around us and the world around us. So let's start here with the Andaman Islands. We're going to start with our first text. So here we have our first text. It's by an anthropologist, George William Gilmore. The title of the text is Animism, or Thought Current of Primitive Peoples, written 1919, around 100 years ago. Now, when he's talking about these tribes here, he's describing it, and of course, in a particular Western viewpoint, Orientalist viewpoint, as it has been termed, meaning that he's understanding and observing these groups according to his abilities and his background. So we always have to think about that. This is always an interpretation. Same thing with the next text as well. But it's an interesting beginning here. So let's have a read of Gilmore here in the text that he's got for us. He says, "We have noted that some tribes mutilate the body of the dead, thinking that by so doing they inflict like wounds upon the soul, and thus impose incapacity for harm upon the ghost of the double of the body. Particularly interesting in this connection is the relationship of this ghost and other beings to warning and prediction. Among the powers of the soul is that of return and manifestation to survivors. Melanesian, Andaman, and African ghosts, for instance, reappear to converse with their people and become a medium of information, particularly through dreams do they mediate a performance recorded in antiquity and attested to in the present-day belief over a large area indeed. It is through the dream that approach to human comprehension is most easily made by the divine, superhuman, or discarnate powers." So there Gilmore is outlining something important, which is that dreams, for majority of human history, has always been linked to existing life. You understood what would happen, you understood what was going around you through dreams, and this is not the only one of these texts. Here's another one. This is coming from the Viking North, the Scandinavian North. Actually, this is a Icelandic tale. The Laxdela, I'm sure I mispronounced that, but the Laxdela saga. This is printed in 1899, but obviously it's a much older saga. So Gest Oddleifsson lived west at Bardastrand at Hagi. He was a great chieftain and a sage. He was foreseeing in many things and in good friendship with all great men, and many came to him for counsel. Gudrun came to the spring and greeted her relative Gest. So this was her cousin, Gudrun, the cousin of Gest. She greeted him warmly, and Gest gave her a good welcome, and they began to talk together. Gudrun said, I have dreamt many dreams this winter, but 4 of the dreams do trouble my mind so much. And Gest said, Tell me your dreams. It may be that I can make something of them. And Gest answered, I clearly see what these dreams have. After Gudrun explained her dreams, Gest answers, I clearly see what these dreams betoken, but you will find my unravelling savouring much of the sameness, for I must read them all nearly in the same way. You will have 4 husbands, and it misdoubts me when you are married to the first, it will be no love match. Now, of course, as you can see, we've cut this table here to a minimum paragraph here for your time and reading. But this is again another proof, another evidence of how dreams were taken as a very serious sign from something beyond our material life, from our physical life. So here's another text here from Henry Callaway. This time it's an examination of the Zulu peoples, who are peoples of South Africa, African peoples of South Africa, that region, and Zimbabwe, the whole region in the southern part of Africa. So this is the religious system of the Amazulu, 1870. He writes, dreams, subjective apparitions, and similar psychical phenomena are in the native mind, as you can see again, it's from a particular time and place that he writes. So he's using words like native and barbarian, etc. That in the native mind are so intimately wrapped up with the Amatongo that this is the proper place for considering their views on such matters, without which their views on the Amatongo would be incomplete. The Amatongo make revelations by dreams. If during your sleep you dream of a man whom you do not thoroughly know to be of such character that he may do you an injury, yet in your sleep you dream that he suddenly stabs you, not openly, but by stealth. When you awake, you are much amazed, and you say, Oh, forsooth, I thought such a one a really good man, and does he actually hate me? I thank the Itongo, that's the ancestors, who are, again, they're coming to you through the dream. I thank the ancestors, the Itongo of our people, who have revealed the man to me, that I may know him. Now I may know him, for the Itongo has caused him to approach me, and he came to kill me. I do not know in what respect I have injured him. So Callaway continues, and yet, so he explains how the local peoples are thinking of dreams. He says, and they continue on their guard against the man, believing that the dream does not lie, but there is something in the man with which you are not acquainted. Again, if in your sleep you dream of a beast pursuing you and trying to kill you, when you wake, you wonder and you say, How is it that I should dream of a wild beast pursuing me? And then, if in the morning they say they are going out to hunt, whether wild beasts or game, you go knowing that you are in jeopardy. You know that the Itongo brought the beast to you, that you might know that if you do not take care, you may die. If you go to the hunt, you are on your guard. So he continues here and he says, Again, if you during sleep you dream of returning to your people from whom you separated a long time ago, and see that so and so and so and so are unhappy, and when you wake your body is unstrung, you know that the Itongo has taken you to your people, that you might see the trouble in which they are, and that if you go to them you will find out the cause of their unhappiness, and you continue listening and expecting to hear news if anyone comes. And truly a man may come from the neighborhood, and you ask after the welfare of your people. If he tells you that they are in bad circumstances, all you have to say is, Oh, I merely ask, as I have already heard the news in my dream. So that gives you a kind of concept of how deeply tied dreams were seen to be next to the realities of traditional societies. So now we're moving to the second section now, where we're talking about a different concept of dreaming. And in this section, we're going to look at a much more European-focused idea, which is what we could summarize as a materialist idea. An idea that makes a distinction between the dream as tied to reality, and instead the dream as being a separate thing, something that perhaps is a separate world, an entirely different world to your lived life. So the real world is the rational world. The real world is the world that matters, the world that you can interpret and understand. And the dream world is just kind of irrational netherworld where perhaps your fears and hopes and all these things can go into, but that do not have any real importance for your real existence. So there's a clear distinction in this European tradition, starting from the Greeks. The first two we'll look at are the Greeks, and then after that, building on that, the European philosophers of the Enlightenment. So we'll be looking at a few of these texts. So starting with one of the great Greek thinkers and prose writers, Epictetus. Um, the Golden Sayings of Epictetus. This is later on during the Roman period. He was a Stoic philosopher. He was a contemporary of Marcus Aurelius, the emperor, who was also a famous Stoic philosopher. Here, one of the sayings here, he says, "Death, Let it come when it will, whether it smite but a part of the whole. Fly, you tell me, fly. But whither shall I fly? Can any man cast me beyond the limits of the world? It may not be. And whithersoever I go, there I shall still find the moon, the sun, and the stars. There I shall still find dreams and omens, and converse with the gods. So here, of course, is very typical of the Stoic philosophy, which is one of, you know, being utterly rational, utterly focused on the utterly materialistic, and utterly focused on the material world, the existence around you. If anyone has read Marcus Aurelius, he's probably the most famous Stoic. Epictetus was also a famous one, and they share this kind of contempt for the irrational, contempt for the mystical, contempt for the belief-based world, and it's all about living in the here and now, not fearing death, not fearing afterlife, not fearing what is beyond or beneath or in the netherworld, but only dealing with what's in front of you. So that's an example of that European trend. So as we move here to the next one, of course, you'll recognize this name, Aristotle, a great grandfather of philosophy, and his little text here that he wrote after his Nichomechaean Ethics, which is one of the most famous books that he put out on the ideas of human life and human understanding. And in this little treatise on dreams, written around 350 before Christ, so notice that Aristotle was writing in ancient Greece, whereas Epictetus was writing in ancient Rome. So Aristotle came before Epictetus. But he writes, we must, in this next place, investigate the subject of the dream, and first inquire to which of the faculties of the soul it presents itself. So he had previously written an important book called On Nature, de Natura, on nature, and this is what he's trying to build up on in this little text. Notice these words, investigate, faculties, inquiry. So this is what you'll see, one of the reasons why Aristotle was often seen as the father of science, the grandfather of modern science, because he has a very materialistic, scientific mind. He seeks to understand only things that he can observe with his feeling, with his contemplation, with his senses, etc. So he's first trying to understand, where does the dream exist? Which faculties does it occupy and present itself in? I.e., so that's to say, whether the affection is one which pertains to the faculty of intelligence or to that of sense perception, for these are the only faculties within us by which we acquire knowledge. If then the exercise of the faculty of sight is actual seeing, that of the auditory faculty, hearing, and in general that of the faculty of sense perception, perceiving, and if there are some perceptions common to the senses, such as figure and magnitude or motion, while there are others that pertain or belong more, such as color, sound, and taste, which are peculiar to themselves and belong more on their own ground, each to their own sense. And further, if all creatures, when their eyes are closed in sleep, are unable to see, and the analogous statement is true of the other sense, so that manifestly we perceive nothing when we sleep, we may therefore conclude that it is not by sense perception that we perceive a dream. So that's a long, typical Aristotelian way of slowly, logically, but in a very long sentence explaining that in dreams, we obviously, according to his view, we do not perceive things through our senses. It's the imagination that's at work. So he goes on here to explain some of the complications. He says, but neither is it by opinion that we do so. For in dreams, we not only assert, for example, that some kind of object is approaching, or whether that object is a man or a horse, which would therefore be an exercise of opinion. but that the object is also white or beautiful. So we also make these further uh, understandings of things in our dream, which therefore it points out that this is points on which opinion without sense perception asserts nothing either truly or falsely. So we see a man or a horse coming towards us who is white or beautiful or aggressive, and none of those things can only be based on opinion. There has to be a sense perception. There has to be a reaction of the senses. So he's saying obviously there's something about senses and perception that happens in our dreams. So he adds, it is, however, a fact that the soul makes such assertions in sleep. We seem to see equally well that the approaching figure is a man and that it is white. In dreams, too, we think something else over and above the dream presentation, just as we do in waking moments when we perceive something. For in dreams, too, we also often reason about that which we perceive. So, too, in sleep, we sometimes have thoughts other than the mere phantasms immediately towards our mind. So here he's referring to this practice of lucid dreaming, which is when you start to be aware of your own dream. You become aware that you're dreaming and you still dream. That can happen for quite a few people. How then and in what manner it takes place is what we have to examine, the dream. Let us assume what is indeed clear enough, that the affectation of dreaming pertains to sense perception as surely as sleep itself does. So he goes on to the next bit here, and he says, but since we have in our work on the soul treated of presentation, and the faculty of presentation is identical to that of sense perception, though the essential notion of a faculty of presentation is different from that of a faculty of sense perception, and since presentation is the movement set up by a sensory faculty when actually discharging its function, while a dream appears to be a presentation. For a presentation which occurs in sleep, whether simply or in some particular way, is what we call a dream. It manifestly follows that dreaming is an activity of the faculty of sense perception, belongs to this faculty qua presentative. So here, if you've come across Aristotle before, his understanding of sense perception is that the senses react to what is presented to us. When there are things out there that we can see, our eyes react to what is being presented. It's a kind of almost mechanical view, again, very material, mechanical view of the world, of how we work. And for a long time, actually, this was how people understood things like light and seeing and hearing, etc. But what he's adding here is, furthermore, is that what he's saying is that at some point, obviously, as he already mentioned before, senses obviously are not being activated when we're sleeping, in his view, because we're asleep, our senses are shut off. We don't hear. When someone's sleeping and you shout in their ear, you'll have to shout very loud to wake them up. Same thing with eyes. You can wave your hands above their eyes, they still won't wake up and see your hands. But he's saying at the same time that there is still this presentation that's being put forward, because ultimately, as he says here, for a presentation which occurs in sleep, whether simply or not, or in some particular way, is what we call a dream. So something has presented itself for us to react to. So this is where he's getting stuck. He's not understanding how, this is that's probably one of the reasons he's written an entire little chapter here on dreams, because it's one of those problems that doesn't fit very well with his understanding of the world. So here he's going to answer. He says, what happens in these cases may be compared with what happens in the case of projectiles moving in space. So think of, for example, a cannon or a catapult, if we use an example from his time. So he's saying here, you will see what he says. For in the case of these, the movement continues even when that which set up the movement is no longer in contact with the things that are moved. For that which set them in motion moves a certain portion of air, and this in turn being moved excites motion in another portion, and so accordingly. So here you can see how Of course, this is in the times of science before gravity, before the modern science. So people thought that there were kind of miasmas and these different, that the air was full of existing atoms that moved each other, and therefore the movement was a kind of chain reaction. So when the catapult is sent, when it's released, the rock on the catapult that's shot, that uh, presentative, the catapult creating the reason, so the dream creates the reason for a perception, and then it leads to a cascading effect, multiple effects of reactions, which is what is being perceived and sensed in the dream. So this is, of course, what he's getting to here. He gives another example. And so accordingly, it is in this way that bodies, whether in air or in liquid, continue moving until they come to a standstill. So there you can see, of course, his Greek understanding of science, of how things react to each other. And therefore, he uses this answer to fix his riddle. How is it that you can have nothing being presented to you in the real material world, and yet it still makes you have senses and perception, i.e., how can you have dreams? And his answer is, from this, from this it is manifest that the stimulatory movements based upon sensory impressions, whether the latter are derived from external objects or from causes within the body, present themselves not only when people are awake, but also then when the affectation which is called sleep has come upon them, in fact with even greater impressiveness. So actually, when you're sleeping, he's saying that you even feel, you react to things that present themselves to you and that trigger your senses and perception even more than if you're awake. But you just don't realize that because you're reacting to them in your sleep. For by day, so he continues, for by day, while the senses and intellect are working together, so his concept here again, something of the old Greek science, something we mostly don't believe in today's science, the idea that senses, that you react to smells and sight and what you hear with your ears are separate parts of the brain, or separate parts of your brain process than your intellect, than your thinking. For by day, while the senses and the intellect are working together, they are extruded from consciousness or obscured, just as smaller is beside, just as a smaller fire is beside a larger fire, or a small beside great pains or pleasures. So here, of course, he's saying that the intellect, the real brain thinking, is what matters when you're awake, and anything that you see or hear or smell comes in as a secondary consideration. You don't think too much about it. And then he says, though as soon as the latter have ceased, even those which are trifling emerge into notice. So this is exactly what he means. So by night, i.e. in sleep, owing to the inaction of the particular senses and their powerlessness to realize themselves, which arises from the reflux of the hot from the exterior parts to the interior, i.e. from the movement. So here he's bringing in his, his Greek science here. Uh, However, so what he's saying is, in the night, you know, because your intelligence is shut down, because your particular thinking and imaginative thinking, creative thinking, analysis, all of this is gone because you're sleeping, then your senses get much more reactive to anything that presents itself. Any little disturbance, if it's too hot, if it's too cold, if someone shuts a door too loud, then they perceive that, and it manifests itself in these various dreams that you have. So you might see that that's particularly tied to that ancient Greek concept of the four humors, cold and hot, and these various reactions to it for your body. Fits again with that Greek science of the ancient Greek understanding. We might have to end up doing a series or lecture on that one as well. But let's move on to the next section here. So here we've moved on a little bit further forward here to the European Enlightenment period. Of course, the Enlightenment begins way before with the Renaissance, and of course, a lot of the knowledge is passed over to the European countries via Italy and Spain from Arabic countries, which were themselves gaining knowledge from the Romans and especially the Greek texts. So many of these texts, including the one we were just looking at with Aristotle, these were passed on through the Arabs, translated into Arabic, then translated back into Latin, reaching Europe through Italy, the Renaissance, that's the 1300s, 1400s, and then here we're reaching the beginnings of the European Enlightenment, which really focuses in the north of Europe, the Netherlands, Italy, northern Italy, Switzerland, Germany, United Kingdom, England back then, and France. So here we have, of course, a classic thinker of the Enlightenment, French Enlightenment, René Descartes. And here he's writing, of course, that famous Meditations on the First Philosophy, 1639. This is the famous dream sequence. You may have come across this. You'll see this is the one where you've heard that famous phrase, I think, therefore I am. You will now see what is the actual phrase, because that's like many textbooks at school or at any studies that you have done. You find that these phrases are often limited to the smallest 5 words within a sentence in order to make it easy to remember. So he doesn't actually say, I think, therefore I am. You'll see what he says here. So he says, whatever I have accepted until now as most true. Here he means most in the sense of, this is old English, old language. So he means as most certainly true, right? He's not saying the most true thing. So whatever I have accepted until now as most certainly true has come to me through my senses. But occasionally I have found that they have deceived me, and it is unwise to trust completely those who have deceived us even once. Yet although the senses sometimes deceive us about objects that are very small or distant, that doesn't apply to my belief that I am here, sitting by this fire, wearing a winter dressing gown, holding this piece of paper in my hand, and so on. It seems to be quite impossible to doubt beliefs like these, which come from the senses. Another example: how can I doubt that these hands or this whole body are mine? To doubt such things, I would have to liken myself to brain-damaged madmen who are convinced they are kings when really they are paupers, or say that they are dressed in purple when they are naked, or that they are pumpkins or made of glass. Such people are insane, and I would be thought equally mad if I modelled myself on them. So he goes on here, suppose then that I am dreaming. It isn't true that I, with my eyes open, am moving my head and stretching out my hands. So suppose that isn't happening. Suppose indeed that I don't even have hands or any body at all. So I shall suppose some malicious, powerful, cunning demon has done all he can to deceive me, rather than this being done by God, who is supremely good and a source of truth. I shall think that the sky, the air, the earth, colors, shapes, sounds, and all external things are merely dreams, that the demon has contrived as traps for my judgment. I shall consider myself as having no hands or eyes, or flesh or blood or senses, but as having falsely believed that I had all these things. I shall stubbornly persist in this train of thought, and even if I can't learn any truth, I shall at least do what I can do, which is to be on my guard against accepting any falsehoods, so that the deceiver, however powerful and cunning he may be, will be unable to affect me in the slightest. This will be hard work, though, and a kind of laziness pulls me back into my old ways. Like a prisoner who dreams that he is free, starts to suspect that he is merely in a dream, and wants to go on dreaming rather than waking up. So I am content to slide back into my old opinions. I fear being shaken out of them, because I am afraid that my peaceful sleep may be followed by a hard labor when I wake, as I shall have to struggle, not in the light, but in the imprisoning darkness of the problems. So here, of course, you see that Descartes is a strong Christian, very devoted Catholic thinker for his whole life. And here, when he starts at the end talking about this whole dream sequence, not wishing to be free, this, of course, will make some of you think of the movies Inception, The Matrix, Shutter Island, maybe. Several movies that have built on this kind of dream sequence. But of course, he's really referring an older kind of piece of work or allegory, the allegory of the cave by Plato. And maybe we'll have a chance to check that out in another lecture. So he's adding here, he goes on, he says, but now that I'm supposing that there is a supremely powerful and malicious deceiver who has set out to trick me in every way he can, now what shall I say that I am? Can I now claim to have any of the features that I used to think I had belonging to a body? When I think about them really carefully, I find that they are all open to doubt. I shan't waste time by showing this about them each separately. But now what about the features that I attributed to the soul? Nutrition or movement? So here he is actually referencing Aristotle. Again, you can see the direct lineage, the direct line of thinking, because Aristotle's book on the soul, the Anima, which was previously mentioned earlier, that one had focused on this idea that the principal difference between humans and animals and other types of living things is their soul needs nutrition, it needs reproduction, food, etc. to feed them, and movement, but also imagination. That was the kind of core thing that makes a human soul special. But you can see here he's saying, well, what about the soul? I mean, after all, I could say my nutrition or my movement is good enough. He adds, since now I am pretending that I don't have a body, then these are mere fictions. So this is a big problem, he's adding, because he's saying, if I have no body, and I'm not sure I have a body, this is the classic doubting argument, the Cartesian doubt that you're seeing here. And he's saying, if I don't have any body, then I don't need nutrition, don't need to eat, don't need to move. So what's necessary here? So he's saying, these are mere fictions. Are these mere fictions? What about sense perception? Right? Again, coming back to Aristotle. What about sense perception? Well, he explained, Descartes says, no, one needs a body in order to perceive. And besides, when I'm dreaming, I have seemed to perceive through the senses many things that I later realized I had not perceived in that way. The dreams had tricked me to think that I really smelled that burning toasted bread, or I really saw the sea when I was actually living in a small house in the countryside. The dreams made me convinced of something that I did not see in my real life. And then finally he settles here, thinking, what about thinking? And here he says, at last I have discovered it. Thought, this is the one thing that cannot be separated from me. I am, I exist, that is certain. But for how long? For as long as I am thinking, but perhaps no longer than that, for it might be that if I stopped thinking, I would stop existing, and I have to treat that as a possibility that would actually, I will have to treat that possibility as though it were actual, because my present policy is to reject, here he's talking about his approach, my present philosophical approach is to reject everything that isn't necessarily true. Strictly speaking, then, I am simply a thing that thinks, a mind, or an intelligence or intellect, or reason, these being words whose meaning I have only just come to know. Still, I am a real existing thing. What kind of thing? Well, I have answered that, a thinking thing. In this last paragraph here, of course, this is the I think, therefore I am. And you can see the influence of Descartes' mathematics here. He was a great mathematician, logician, focused a lot on logic, and you can see that here in his whole approach. It's all about finding the logic in where to begin. In a way, he's applying a mathematical question to philosophy. He's asking, how can I know anything without starting from the very basics? 2 plus 2 equals 4. So here he's doing the same thing, and he's saying, well, this is a tautology. How could I not exist if I could not think about existing? And therefore, my thinking proves to me my existence. So then he adds that, he goes on, he says, well then, what am I? Well, he explains, I am a thing that thinks. And what is that? A thing that doubts, a thing that understands, that affirms, that denies, that wants, that refuses, and also that imagines and senses. There is a long list of attributes for me to have, and it really is I who has them all. Why should it not be me? Isn't it one and the same I who now doubts almost everything, understands all those same things, and affirms this same thing? So, if I can doubt things, again, the logic, right, the tautology, circular logic, if I am doubting my existence, if I'm doubting whether I feel or have a body, he's saying, because if I'm thinking that all of it is a dream, that I can no longer separate dreams from reality, then therefore by logic, by tautology, everything that I doubt I must also be able to affirm, that I must say that it must exist as well. There's as much chance that it exists as that it doesn't exist. So he says here, namely, that I exist and that I think, and denies everything else and wants to know more and refuses to be deceived, imagines many things involuntarily, and is aware of others that seem to come from the senses. So this is what he says, this is who I am, a mind that is able to do all these things. Isn't all this just as true as the fact that I exist? Even if I am in a perpetual dream, and even if my creator is doing his best to deceive me, these activities are all aspects of my thinking and are inseparable from myself. The fact that it is I who doubt and understand and want is so obvious that I can't see how to make it any clearer. But the I who imagines is also the same I, for even if, as I am pretending, none of the things that I imagine really exist, I really do imagine them, and this is part of my thinking. Lastly, it is also this same I who senses or is aware of bodily things, seemingly through the senses. Because I may be dreaming, I cannot say for sure that I now see the flames or hear the wood crackling. Remember, he's sitting next to his fire in the middle of, I think he would have been in the Netherlands, or he was exiled from France for his quite crazy ideas at the time. Still cannot say for sure that I see the flames and hear the wood crackling, or feel the heat of this fire next to me. But I certainly seem to see and to hear and to be warmed. The fact that my mind is interpreting this cannot be denied. This cannot be false. What is called sensing is strictly just this seeming, and when sensing is understood in this restricted sense of the word, it's simply thinking. Okay? So you can see here that Descartes has, really reinforced. He started out doubting everything, and what he's ended up coming to is a much more strong materialist view, even more materialistic, even less doubtful than Aristotle, than his predecessors. So he adds here finally, for I now notice that the two are vastly different, in that dreams are never linked by memory with all the other actions of life as waking experiences are. If while I am awake anyone were suddenly to appear to me and then disappear immediately, as happens in sleep, so that I couldn't see where he had come from or where he had gone to, I could reasonably judge that he was a ghost or an hallucination rather than a real man. But if I have a firm grasp of when, where, and whence something comes to me, and if I can connect my perception of it with the whole of the rest of my life without a break, then I am sure that in encountering it, I am not asleep, but I am awake. So I'm sure this little sequence here will remind you of that Inception trick that the director Christopher Nolan and his brother, the writer of the movie, that they put this little trick of the totem, which you had to spin. The main actor had to spin to check if he was in a dream, and one of the ways that he knew that would be if it was acting as a normal totem, a normal thing that would fall. The same thing here again with Matrix, the movie Matrix. You can see where it was influenced, because you have that section in the Matrix where you have the deja vu, and you see they see a black cat going past them twice. And that, of course, is very, very unlikely in the real world. So that kind of tells you that there's something wrong in it being the false world, the dream world. So let us move here again to another philosopher, Enlightenment philosopher. This time it's an English Enlightenment philosopher, Thomas Hobbes, a very important philosopher for the creation and theory of the modern state, the nation state, and the conservative movement of politics, which sought to organize the nation state. I'm sure we'll have a chance to discuss this in another session. But for here, this is just talking about his approach to dreams in his famous book Leviathan, written a few decades after Descartes. So here he says, the imaginations of them that sleep are those we call dreams, and these also, as are all other imaginations, have been before, either totally or by parcels, in the sense, and because in sense the brains and nerves, which are the necessary organs of sense, are so benumbed in sleep as not easily to be moved by the action of external objects, there can happen in sleep no imagination, and therefore no dream, but what proceeds from the agitation of the inward parts of the man's body. For the connection they have with the brain and other organs, when they were distempered, do keep the same in motion, whereby the imaginations there formerly made appear as if a man were waking, saving that the organ of sense being now benumbed, so as that there is no new object which can master and obscure them with a more vigorous impression. Okay, now we have a prize winner for long sentences here, but what he's really getting to here is that sleep is a shutdown. It's another world. It's a black world as opposed to the white world of real life. And this, of course, fits very well with the rationalistic, power-focused, material-focused view of the world that Hobbes has. He thinks that what matters is what people do with their lives in the real world. Again, as you can see here, I've said the real world as though the dream world is something that's not part of our reality. So again, this fits very well with this European Enlightenment rejection, European modern Enlightenment rejection of dreams as being part of our existing reality. That's what he's really saying here, that everything is coming from internal questions. This is his speculation. He thinks that the dreams that we have and the movements we have in our sleep are all coming from external things that are going on, and that they're not really affected by external senses, external encouragements. And so he says here, proceeds from the agitation of the inward parts of the man's body, which inward parts, for the connection they have with the brain and other organs, when they be distempered meaning disturbed. So when there's something disturbing you, your internal organs, or so again, it comes a little bit back to that Aristotle view of the humans in a certain way. Here it's a kind of updated version of that. So that actually creates in the man some kind of disturbances, and that makes it as though they're waking up, but in reality they're still in a dream. So that's what he says here. It makes it appear as if a man were awaking. So he's explaining why people have these dreams and they have these talk in their sleep and they move around in their sleep, but actually all it is a trick. It's just an impression that is being played upon by your body. So here we go to the next section here of Thomas Hobbes with Leviathan. So here he goes on. He says, a dream must needs be more clear in the silence of sense than our waking thoughts, and hence it cometh to pass that it is a hard matter, and by many thought impossible, to distinguish exactly between sense and dreaming. For my part, when I consider that in dreams I do not often nor constantly think of the same persons, places, objects, and actions that I do waking, nor remember so long a train of coherent thoughts dreaming as at other times, and because waking I often observe the absurdity of dreams, but never dream of the absurdities of my waking thoughts, I am well satisfied that, being awake, I know dream I now dream not, though when I dream I think myself awake. Seeing dreams are caused by the distemper of some of the inward parts of the body. Diverse distempers must need cause different dreams. So this is a very Hobbesian view, which is again very materialist, focused on the rational, the real life out there in the real world, the social life, the political life, and not really interested in the internal thought, the existence of an internal life for people, for individuals. Here at the end, he's just dismissing it again. It's just the distempers, the disturbances of your body. If you feel sick, you feel bad, then you have a bad dream or you have something that affects you. And his proof here is that, if you don't, since he's not seeing every time different, the same people, he's not recognizing the people. They're always these kind of random, uh, generic people that sees in his dream. That for him is proof that the memories are not being triggered, and he must be in a dream. He must not be in the real world. So that's his answer to the whole Cartesian problem, to the whole issue of dream versus reality. And he goes on here, he says, and hence it is that lying cold breatheth dreams of fear and raiseth the thought and image of some fearful object. So lying cold here, he means, being in the cold, sleeping in a cold situation makes you feel fearful, and that comes out in your dream. The motion from the brain to the inner parts, and from the inner parts to the brain being reciprocal, and that as anger causeth heat in some parts of the body when we are awake. So you get angry, you start to feel palpitations, your blood boils, as they say. You start to get really angry. Even your nostrils start to expel heat. You know, and he's saying that same way, vice versa. So too, when we sleep, the overheating of the same parts causes anger in your dreams, and raises up in the brain the imagination of an enemy. In the same manner as natural kindness, when we are awake, causeth desire, and desire makes heat in certain other parts of the body. So this is, he's talking about the forbidden parts of the body. So also too much heat in those parts when we sleep raiseth in the brain an imagination of some kindness shown. So he goes on here and he says, in sum, our dreams are the reverse of our waking imaginations, the motion when we are awake beginning at one end, and when we dream at another. The most difficult discerning of a man's dream from his waking thoughts is, then, when by some accident we observe not that we have slept. So he explains, this is easy to happen to a man full of fearful thoughts, and whose conscience is much troubled, and that sleepeth without the circumstances of going to bed or putting off his clothes, as one that noddeth in a chair for he that taketh pains and industriously lays himself to sleep, in case any uncouth and exorbitant fancy come upon him. So he's talking again about his, nice, nice imagination, as he was saying. Cannot easily think it other than a dream. So he goes on here to the more important point. He says, we read of Marcus Brutus, one that had his life given him by Julius Caesar, and was also his favorite, and notwithstanding murdered him. How Marcus Brutus, the ally of Caesar, the one who ended up stabbing Caesar in the Senate alongside the senators, killing the Emperor Caesar. How at Philippi, the night before he gave battle to Augustus Caesar, the successor to Julius Caesar, he saw a fearful apparition, which is commonly related by historians as a vision, but considering the circumstances, one may easily judge it to have been a short dream. For sitting in his tent, pensive and troubled with the horror of his rash act of having murdered Caesar, it was not hard for him, slumbering in the cold, to dream of that which most affrighted him, which fear, as by degrees it made him awake, so also it must needs make the apparition by degrees to vanish. And having no assurance that he slept, he could have no cause to think it was a dream or anything but a vision. So here Hobbes is giving a kind of long-winded validation or explanation of his idea that, maybe our Brutus in the end became cowardly and scared of fighting Caesar's son, Augustus, maybe he did all that because of this coldness in his sleep that tricked his understanding. And this is not very rare, not a very rare accident. For even they who be perfectly awake, if they be timorous and superstitious, possessed with fearful tales, and alone in the dark, are subject to the like fancies, and believe that they see spirits and dead men's ghosts walking in churchyards, whereas it is either their fancy only, or else the knavery of such persons as make use of such superstitious fear to pass, disguised in the night, to places they would not be known to haunt. From the ignorance of how to distinguish dreams and other strong fancies from vision and sense did arise the greatest part of the religion of the Gentiles, that's to say the non-Jews, non-Christians, pre-Christian, pre-Jewish, pre-Christian thinking, religious thinking in times past that worshipped satyrs, fauns, nymph, and the like. So again, totally materialistic and really rejecting any, role that dreaming might have in our living, waking life. Here's another important thinker, this time it's a kind of a father of liberal political approaches, liberal political theory, John Locke, strongly influenced by Thomas Hobbes, another Englishman, but with a different outlook politically. An essay concerning humane understanding from 1690. Locke says here, it is true we have sometimes instances of perception whilst we are asleep, and retain the memory of those thoughts. But how extravagant and incoherent for the most part they are, how little conformable to the perfection and order of the rational being. Sleep without dreaming is rest from all of these, and dreaming itself is the having of ideas, whilst the outward senses are stopped, so that they receive not outward objects with their usual quickness in the mind. So, instead of feeling some kind of reaction to what you see and smell and touch, instead what you're having is a kind of presentation, very much like Aristotle was saying, but something that is generated from inside of your mind. From in your brain has generated something to impact your senses and to dream about the thing that has been generated. So these are not suggested. This is what Locke is saying: is this is not suggested by any external objects or any known occasion, nor any under the choice any choice of conduct of the understanding at all. And whether that which we call ecstasy be not dreaming with the eyes open, I leave to be examined. Here he means with ecstasy, he means those people having seances, periods of hallucinations. And in terms of the understanding, this is something that, of course, you'll understand by reading the entire book, the entire essay. But he's meaning, the way that we interpret the world around us. That's the understanding. Hence, it is probable that thinking is the action, not the essence of the soul. And here he goes on to add, trace it a little further, and you find the mind in sleep retired, as it were, from the senses, and out of the reach of those motions made on the organs of sense, which at other times produce very vivid and sensible ideas. I need not for this instance in those who sleep out whole stormy nights without hearing the thunder, or seeing the lightning, or feeling the shaking of the house, which are sensible enough to those who are waking. So, some his point is that obviously sleeping can actually shut you off from senses, and you cannot even hear things around you. But in this retirement of the mind from the senses, it often retains a yet more loose and incoherent manner of thinking, which we call dreaming. And last of all, sound sleep closes the scene quite, and puts an end to all the appearances. This, I think, almost everyone has experience of in himself, and his own observation without difficulty leads him thus far, that which I would further conclude from hence is. So before I go on to the next part here, you can see that he's actually outlining what is today called deep sleep, as opposed to REM sleep, and we'll come back to that later. But he's outlining the idea that in deep sleep we don't have the dreaming; we're just knocked out. So he says here, No one will disagree with me on this, as you have all experienced this, the difference between vivid dreaming sleep, dreamful sleep, and deep sleep. And that leads into this conclusion, which is coming through, that he says that since the mind, you have to conclude from this that since the mind can sensibly put on at several times several degrees of thinking, and be sometimes, even in a waking man, so remiss as to have thoughts dim and obscure to that degree that they are very little removed from none at all, and at last in the dark retirements of sound sleep loses the sight perfectly of all ideas whatsoever. Since I say this is evidently so in matter of fact and constant experience, so again, no one will question this. Everyone has felt having a sleep with more dreams and having a deeper sleep. Then I ask whether it not be probable that thinking is the action and not the essence of the soul. So here he's defining himself against Aristotle, that the imaginative and the thinking is not what defines our soul. And again, here against, remember Descartes, who said that the thing that makes me exist is my thinking. But here you can see with Locke, it's gone even more materialistic, that actually we are, in a sense, in his understanding, we are machines in a way that are thinking machines. And that's the action that we do is we think. But it's not some kind of hidden secret soul inside us, but rather what we do. Since the operations of agents will easily admit of intention and remission, but the essences of things are not conceived capable of any such variation. So his point here, of course, if thinking is part of us, why do we have this variation in sleep? Why do we have moments of sleep when we are dreaming vivid dreams, and then other times when we're just knocked out and falling asleep, not thinking of anything? That must mean that thinking is not constant, which means that the action has gone, like a processor on your computer. There are moments that the processor experiences higher demand and goes higher and higher. Same thing he says here as well in a waking man, right? Even in a waking man, you see this. So when you're studying for exams or you have a lot of work on your desk at work, then your brain goes into overdrive and starts to think heavily. But when you're in a relaxed mood, when you're not in a kind of maybe doing yoga or something, then you're actually turning down, you're clocking down your thinking. And this is his point here. But yet, if after all this anyone will be so skeptical as to distrust his tainty senses, and to affirm that all we see and hear and feel and taste, think and do during our whole being is but a series of deluding experiences of a long dream. So as you can see here, of course, he's referring to Descartes, René Descartes' dream sequence. He's saying if anyone still wants to act like Descartes and say, well, I'm not sure of anything I'm seeing and feeling and smelling as being real, whereof there is no reality, and therefore will question the existence of all things or our knowledge of anything, I must desire him to consider that if all be a dream, then Helioth but dream that he makes the question, and so it is not much matter that a waking man should answer him. But yet, if he pleases, he may dream that I make him this answer. So he's saying, you might even be dreaming that what you're reading here, what I'm telling you right now in this lecture, is all a dream. Everything that from the very beginning is all a dream. But if you're still that doubtful and you're still not sure, he says, well, I have this offer to you. I have this answer, that the certainty of things existing in rerum natura, when we have the testimony of our senses for it, is not only as great as our frame can attain to, but as our condition needs, for our faculties being suited not to the full extent of being, nor to a perfect, clear, comprehensive knowledge of the things free from all doubt and scruple, but to the preservation of us in whom they are and accommodated to the use of life. So what he's really saying here, that we are machines or organisms that try to survive and exist and take care of ourselves, and we use our faculties, including thinking, but also including running and eating and smelling, in order to keep ourselves alive, to keep ourselves, we live within nature. We're always raised by nature and within the conditions of nature. Again, very materialistic thinking here again, and not focused on the imaginations or the the possibilities of delusions, or the questions that we saw with Descartes. So he's saying even if you want to think that things are deluding you, that's part of life. That's part of the existing conditions as an organism. You might make a misjudgment. A lion hunting, um, for antelopes in the wild, can make misjudgments, can delude themselves of the distance between themselves and the antelope, and in doing this, their faculties would have failed them, and they would have, lost some food that would allow them to survive. There are plenty of other examples like this, and this is what he's saying. So it says, therefore, they serve, our faculties serve to our purpose well enough, if they will but give us certain notice of these things which are convenient or inconvenient to us. For he that sees a candle burning, and hath experimented the force of its flame, by putting his finger in it, will little doubt that this is something existing without him which does him harm, and puts him to great pain. So here, John Locke is putting a kind of, he's shutting it down with Descartes. He's shutting down the Descartes show here. He's saying, look, I like Descartes stories, but what he should have done is he should have stopped himself from sleeping next to the fire and put his finger on the fire and seen whether he would react, because his faculties would have quickly reminded him of the real existence that he is in the real world, and that he needs to survive and stop himself from burning himself. So this is what he's saying. Which is assurance enough. So he's saying that's good enough for me, um, uh, which is assurance enough when no man requires greater certainty to govern his actions by than that by then what is as certain as his actions themselves. And if our dreamer pleases to try whether the glowing heat of a glass furnace be barely a wandering imagination in a drowsy man's fancy, by putting his hand into it, he may perhaps be weakened into a certainty greater than he could wish. That is something more than a bare imagination. So another example of that again. If you're feeling that you're not sure about your surroundings, just well, don't do this at home, but cause some harm, and you'll see that things change. So that wraps up with John Locke, the kind of high enlightenment thinking, the great confidence that was being agreed upon by many thinkers in Europe in that period of the certainty and the rationality of humans, the material approach to the world, that the real world could be observed, examined, sensed, understood, built upon. But of course, over the next hundreds of years, starting really from the 1800s, moving on, especially late 1800s to the 1900s and today's world, there's been a much more complex post-enlightenment thinking, which moved away from these certainties. And the beginnings of that was actually in sciences, so the very pillar that many of these thinkers like Aristotle and John Locke had built themselves on, this belief that science could do no wrong, that the senses and scientific understanding of the world around us uh, was capable of answering everything. But what had happened, this without going too far into it, the rise of these sciences, which became less and less based on sense perception. The first blow was really Isaac Newton with the theory of gravity, by outlining something that we have no way of seeing and perceiving. Just kind of revolutionized our minds, revolutionized the world around us. And of course, his own later disciple, Albert Einstein, had a very similar impact on 20th century post-enlightenment. And then after that, of course, the current physics and many new advances in chemistry, biology, many other aspects. And when it comes to the dreams and this kind of certainty of the materialists that we have just seen, there was a challenge to that, a post-enlightenment challenge there. And this really began that story began in Vienna, in Austria, in the late 19th century, in the 1880s, 1890s, with a gentleman called Mr. Freud, Sigmund Freud. With Freud, we see that he was not really the first thinker or person to discuss psychology. There had been William James in the United States. Arguably Friedrich Nietzsche, the philosopher, was also very concerned with internal thinking, internal mind states. Um, and of course, the Russian novelist Fyodor Dostoevsky is also seen as a very important influence on the rise of psychology. But in like kind of in not coining psychology as a discipline, but giving it a form, Freud's influence is singular and fundamental for the discipline and for especially for the look, the inward look, the return to looking inside. And here we see in this text, the famous interpretation of dreams, his most famous text, um, that basically that he still believed there was a kind of scientific approach to this. So you can see how difficult it was for these thinkers, even like Freud, at the end of this Enlightenment era, how difficult it was for them to give up that kind of scientific, logical approach. And this is what we see here. So he explains, in the following pages, I shall demonstrate there is a psychological technique which makes it possible to interpret dreams, and that on the application of this technique, every dream will reveal itself as a psychological structure, full of significance, and one which may be assigned to a specific place in the psychic activities of the waking state, right? The waking state being your daily life. Um, Further, I shall endeavor to elucidate the processes which underlie the strangeness and obscurity of dreams, and to deduce from these the processes, the nature of the psychic forces whose conflict or cooperation is responsible for our dreams. So here you have a direct rejection of Thomas Hobbes, who had dismissed these as simply you feel cold, you have a bad dream. No, what Freud is saying is no, these are fundamental things. Now, he's saying we're not going to try to, like the ancient world, we're not going to try to see omens and read the future and understand what the weather will do next week from our dreams. But what we will try to do is understand, through careful study, we'll try to understand what is going on in our real life. So you can see he still has that separation of the real life and the dream life. But for him, although that separation exists, there's a bridge. You can find a bridge, and that bridge is psychological analysis, psychoanalysis. So then he says that the naive judgment of the dreamer on waking assumes that the dream, even if it does not come from another world, has at all events, so at the very least, has transported the dreamer into another world, that all the material composing the content of the dream is somehow derived from experience, that it is reproduced or remembered in the dream. This at least may be accepted as an incontestable fact, yet it would be wrong to assume that such a connection between the dream, content, and reality will be easily obvious from a comparison between the two on a number uh, uh, between the two. On the contrary, the connection must be carefully sought, and in quite a number of cases it may for a long while elude discovery. So it takes a long time to go through psychoanalysis. It takes a long time to understand all the different patterns that are emerging and to make connections between what the dreamer is thinking and feeling in the dream and what has happened in their waking state, in their waking life. So he continues on here. He says, if I were asked what is the theoretical value of the study of dreams, I should reply that it lies in the additions to psychological knowledge and the beginnings of an understanding of the neuroses which we thereby obtain. Who can foresee the importance thorough knowledge of the structure and functions of the psychic apparatus may attain, when even our present state of knowledge permits of successful therapeutic intervention in the curable forms of psychoneurosis? So, a justification he's giving here that, don't laugh me off. He's saying, don't laugh off my study of dreams because it may help us in the real life, in the real world. But it may be asked, what of the practical value of this study in regard to knowledge of the psyche? and the discovery of the hidden particularities of the individual character. Have not the unconscious impulses revealed by dreams the value of real forces in the psychic life? Is the ethical significance of the suppressed wishes to be lightly discarded, since, just as they now create dreams, they may some day create other things? So here you can see the beginnings of that psychiatry that later developed. This idea of how to repress or deal with or suppress or confront repressed and negative thinking, negative thoughts that are pushed down and then lead people to do negative things in the real world. Do not feel justified in answering these questions. I have myself not followed up this aspect of the problem of dreams. So he's explaining, I'm just starting to ask these questions now. In any case, however, I believe that the Roman emperor was in the wrong when he ordered one of his subjects to be executed because the latter had dreamt that he had killed the emperor. What the emperor should have first done, he should have first of all have endeavored to discover the significance of the man's dreams. Most probably it was not what it seemed to be, and even if a dream of a different content had actually had this treasonable meaning, it would still be well to recall the words of Plato, that the virtuous man contents himself with dreaming of that which the wicked does in the real world. I am therefore of the opinion that dreams should be acquitted of evil. Whether any reality is to be attributed to the unconscious wishes, I cannot say. Reality must, of course, be denied to all transitory and intermediate thoughts. If we had before us the unconscious wishes, brought to their final and truest expressions, we should still do well to remember that psychic reality is a special form of existence which must not be confounded with material reality. So there you have again the scientific concept, the Enlightenment concept of this dual separation, dualism between the real world and the internal world. That is still with Freud at this stage. He still hasn't changed his mind on that. It seems therefore unnecessary that people should refuse to accept the responsibility for the immorality of their dreams with an appreciation of the mode of functioning of the psychic apparatus and an insight into the relations between conscious and unconscious. All that is ethically offensive in our dream life and the life of fancy for the most part disappears. Okay, so you know he's explaining here we should not repress people who have dreams, and we should encourage them to discuss their dreams so we can understand what is really meant in the real life. What is actually really happening for them in the real life that they're experiencing through dreams. And what of the value of dreams in regard to our knowledge of the future? Well, of course, that is out of the question. So again, he rejects totally this traditional concept we started with of the divination and the omens, etc. One would like to substitute instead the words in regard to the knowledge of the past, for in every sense a dream has its origins in the past. The ancient belief that dreams reveal the future is not indeed entirely devoid of the truth. Why? Because by representing a wish as fulfilled, the dream certainly leads us into the future. But this future, which the dreamer accepts as his present, has been shaped in the likeness of the past by the indestructible wish. So, of course, here you can again come back to psychiatry and the role of psychology in later in the 20th century in trying to mold individuals, shape them, make them more normal, make them more kind of acceptable to society by interpreting their dreams, by asking them, by having therapy sessions. This is something that's everywhere today, of course. Uh, so, of course, here we have some of the issues with Freud. Perhaps we can go into in another session. The problem of Freud is still having this enlightenment concept that you study dreams in order to control them and to understand what are they really revealing about you, so that whatever deep dark wishes, or it doesn't have to be dark wishes, whatever wishes you might have, whatever um, frustrations you have, they do not end up revealing themselves as a future. That they do not become part of what you really do in the real world. In that sense, that's what he's saying. In this sense, yes, dreams can help us understand the future, but not in the old sense. We'll move on here. Just a few years later, here, Henri Bergson, who's a French phenomenological thinker, who was writing in a very similar timeline and affected, reacting to Freud and some of the other psychologists emerging from Austria and Europe in this period. And here it's interesting here because he takes a much more anti-enlightenment viewpoint. You'll see that, if we read through this, you will see that he does not see dreams and materiality as necessarily separate. So he says here, a dream is this: I perceive objects and there is nothing there. I see men, I seem to speak to them, and I hear what they answer, and there is no one there, and I have not spoken. It is all as if real things and real persons were there, then when on waking all has disappeared, both persons and things. How does this happen? But first, is it true that there is nothing there? I mean, is there not presented a certain sense material to our eyes, to our ears, to our touch, etc., during sleep as well as during waking? So we should now be familiar with this question. It's the same question that was presented by Aristotle, by Descartes, by Locke, etc. Close the eyes and look attentively at what is going on in the field of your vision. Many persons questioned on this point would say that nothing is going on, that they just see nothing. No wonder at this, for a certain amount of practice is necessary to be able to observe oneself satisfactorily. But just give the required effort of attention, and you will start to distinguish, little by little, many things. First, in general, a black background. Upon this black background, occasionally brilliant points which come and go, rising and descending, slowly and sedately. More often, spots of many colors, sometimes very dull, sometimes, on the contrary, with certain people, so brilliant that reality cannot even compare with it. These spots spread and shrink, changing form and color constantly, displacing one another. Sometimes the change is slow and gradual, sometimes again it's a whirlwind of vertiginous rapidity. From whence comes all this phantasmagoria? The physiologists and the psychologists have studied this play of colors as ocular spectra or colored spots. Phosphenes, these are the names that they have given to this phenomenon. They explain it either by the slight modifications which occur ceaselessly in the retinal circulation, or by the pressure that the closed lid exerts upon the eyeball, causing a mechanical excitation of the optic nerve. But the explanation of the phenomenon and the name that is given to it matters little. It occurs universally, and it constitutes, I may say at once, the principal material on which we shape our dreams, such stuff as dreams are made on. I will summarize what I have just been saying. When we are sleeping naturally, it is not necessary to believe, as has often been supposed, that our senses are closed to external sensations. Our senses continue to be active. They act, it is true, that with less precision, but in compensation they embrace a host of subjective impressions, which pass unperceived when we are awake. For then we live in a world of perception common to all men, and which reappear in sleep. When we live only for ourselves, thus our faculty of sense perception, far from being narrowed during sleep point, at all points, is on the contrary extended, at least in certain directions, in its field of operations. It is true that it often loses in energy, in tension, what it gains in extension. It brings to us only confused impressions, and these impressions are the materials of our dreams. But they are only the material, they do not suffice to produce them. So Bergson here, what he's saying is, it is not right to say that we are separate in a dual world of the dream and imaginative, or kind of non-waking, non-real world, and the real world, which is material, based on sense perception, etc. What we have seen with Aristotle, with Thomas Hobbes, John Locke, and even now with Freud. Even Freud was saying that, except in his case, Freud was saying that the sense perception is the senses and perception of memories. It's the memories that are hidden deep down in our brain, which come back out in our sleep, in our dreams. And therefore, interpreting the dreams allows us to access those memories and heal us. What Bergson is saying is, no, in fact, fundamentally there is a link between. It's not a link. There's a constant. There's one unitary life that we're living, which includes all aspects of it, including the dreaming and the irrational as well as the rational. All of these are being affected and are reactions to constant senses, constant sense perception. And during our sleep, as he points out, some of those senses go down. Of course, you can't hear as well, you don't see anything. Well, you see what you're, this is the point. You don't see anything that someone next to you is doing if they're waving their hand at you, but you will see the things that are being created from your senses inside the brain. The same ones that if you did the experiment that he was suggesting there of closing your eyes, after a few minutes you'll start to see all these different little lights. His point being, of course, that we don't understand enough what sense perception is. This is again very enlightenment, and in many ways much closer to what we're seeing in current neuroscience, which is that our idea of the separation of the self, of us with our control and our senses and our brain and our soul, whatever you want to call it, and the objects out there, the other, the universe, the existence out there, that separation is not so clear, right? And we've been seeing that, as I mentioned, more and more in science ever since Isaac Newton, and this has been an ongoing challenge to the classic enlightenment, classic idea of science and enlightenment. This is what he's bringing out here. He's saying, well, obviously we still have senses, we're still tied to our senses, and it tells us that dreaming is not just a separate world that is separate from reality. What is the form that will imprint its decision upon the indecision of this material? This form is our memory. So he agrees with Freud here that the way that the dreams are given shape, the thing that produces the shape of these dreams, so that it's not just simply senses like feeling heat, but instead that you have an extension of certain things like the memory of a man or the memory of a dog or something, falling from a cliff or swimming or flying, whatever is happening in your dream. This is actually coming from also the material from your memory is what is producing it. Memory. In a waking state, we have indeed memories which appear and disappear, occupying our mind in turn. But they are always memories which are closely connected with our present situation, our present occupation, our present action. So he's saying no matter how far back you're thinking right now in your memory, you're always relating that to what you're doing right now. This is, the purpose of the memory is to relate it to what's happening to you now. And he adds, yes, I believe indeed that all our past life is there, preserved, up there in the brain, in our noodles, even to the most infinitesimal details, and that we forget nothing, and that all we have felt, perceived, thought, willed from the very first awakening of our consciousness survives indestructibly. But the memories which are preserved in these obscure depths are there in the state of invisible phantoms. They aspire perhaps to come to the light, but they do not even try to rise to it. They know that it is impossible, and that I, as a living and acting being, have something else to do than occupy myself with them. But suppose that at a given moment I become disinterested in the present situation, in the present action, in short, in all which previously has fixed and guided my memory. Suppose, in other words, that I am asleep. So here he's making a distinction here between the way our brain is functioning. So one brain, one reality, both at sleep and when you're awake, but different things that are happening. For Bergson, this is what's happening. Two different tracks. One which is, driven by rationality, driven by uh, needs, material, existing physical needs, and if in that world, the strength of your conscious thoughts pushes aside all those invisible phantoms of the memories that have all been recorded and kept in your data bank in your brain. But when you've turned off your interest and you shut down the processor of your brain, the thinking part and conscious part, then you're going to sleep. Then suddenly these memories, perceiving that I have taken away the obstacle, lowered the barrier in a sense, have raised the trapdoor which has kept them beneath the floor of consciousness, arise from the depths. and they rise, they move, they perform in the night of unconsciousness, a great dance of the macabre. Macabre. They rush together to the door which has been left ajar. They all want to get through, but they cannot. There are too many of them from the multitudes which are called, and which of them will be chosen? It is not hard to say. Formerly, when I was awake, the memories which forced their way were those which could involve claims of relationship with the present situation. So when I was awake, I recalled memories that served me because I was master of my mind. My consciousness was in control in the driving seat. But now I've shut down the engine, I've gone to sleep, so that situation changes. So formerly it was all about the presentation of what I saw and heard around me. And now, when I'm asleep, it is more vague images which occupy my sight, more indecisive sound which affect my ear, more indistinct touches which are distributed over the surface of my body. But there are also more numerous sensations which arrive from the deepest part of the organism. So then, among the phantom memories which aspire to fill themselves with color and with sonority, with sound, in short, with materiality, the only ones that succeed are those which can assimilate themselves with the colored dust that we perceive, the external and internal sensations that we catch, and which besides respond to the effective tone of our general sensibility when this union is effected between memory and the sensation we have a dream. So he's saying that whatever we're feeling like, whether it's cold, so he's coming back a little bit to this, Aristotle, if you remember the Greek view, that when you're feeling a little bit cold, then certain memories will come back and will be admitted entrance into your dream state. Or if you're psychologically, that's what he's saying here, the effective tone. How do you feel psychologically? If you're feeling angry, if you're feeling tired, then certain memories and others will be coming in. So he adds here, he says, but then what is the essential difference between perception, perceiving, and dreaming? What is sleep itself? In place of attaching myself to life, I detach myself from it. Everything has become indifferent to me. I have become disinterested in everything. So turn off the engine, stop driving the brain processor. Sleep is to become disinterested. One sleeps to the exact extent to which one becomes disinterested. A mother who sleeps by the side of her child will not stir at the sound of the thunder, but the sigh of the child will wake her up. Does she really sleep in regard to her child? So that's an important question he's asking here, right? Which is that because he's seeing everything as a unitary, everything is together. There's no rational world. If you use that famous iceberg metaphor of Freud, what is happening upstairs above the water and what is happening underneath the water, the iceberg, the unconscious. For Bergson, as a phenomenologist, he's unitary. He doesn't think that it's a dualism. Everything is connected together. Um, Everything has a uh, connected experience. So the mother, in other words, the mother never really sleeps and loses interest in her child. Even if she's falling asleep, she always has her child in mind somewhere, and that never leaves. So we do not sleep in regard to what continues to interest us. You ask me what it is that I do when I dream. I will tell you what you do when you are awake. You take me, the me of the dreams, me, the totality of your past, and you force me by making me smaller and smaller to fit into a little circle that you trace around your present action. That is what it is to be awake. So again, instrumentalizing the past and the memories, the things around you, taking that, absorbing it, your analytical driver's seat brain, driving the process of your brain and making it useful or interesting or reacting to what you're currently doing, what is your plans for the near future, the far future, exactly, all this kind of concepts. But here he's saying it's the opposite here when you're sleeping. So he's saying uh, that is what it is to live the normal psychical life. It is to battle, it is to will. As for the dream, so to fight and to drive forward, to drive through, that is what living is. And in the dream, it's more about turning off the keys, turning off the ignition, taking a parking yourself somewhere As for the dream, have you really any need that I should explain it? It is the state into which you naturally fall when you let yourself go, when you no longer have the power to concentrate yourself upon a single point, when you have ceased to will. What needs much more to be explained is the marvelous mechanism by which at any moment your will obtains instantly and almost unconsciously the concentration of all that you have within you upon one and the same point, the point that interests you. So here at the end, he's saying that what really is fascinating is not what is happening in when you're dreaming, because it's obviously for him, it's obviously us shutting down. We're not going into another world. We're not going into an unconscious, irrational world. We're just shutting down the engines. We are lowering our state of activity. Really as simple as that. But what he's saying is what is fascinating is that you can concentrate, whether you're in the sleep or in your waking moment, you can take all these different memories, all these things happening around them, and concentrate them into one point because that's what's interesting you at this moment, whether it's currently now in the present or in terms of your future plans. Then he finishes here at the end of his essay on dreams here from 1914. He says, "It is upon this profound slumber that psychology ought to direct its efforts, not only to study the mechanisms of unconscious memory." So here, this is where he's disagreeing with Freud. He's saying, no, you have to see things together. It's not simply about separating conscious and unconscious, examining the unconscious and using this to help your conscious life, but rather understanding it's all one unit. But to examine, so he says, it is better to examine the more mysterious phenomena which are raised by psychical research. So here he gets into the more, again, like many phenomenologists, we might get to explore some of them in later lectures, but they tend to go into this very strongly anti-enlightenment, very strongly speculative, anti-rational approach, and this means that they do get sometimes in trouble for considering non-scientific approaches. Bergson is not the only one like this. There are many, and that's what he's doing here. He's saying what's really interesting is those aspects of dreams and of psychical existence where you feel, well, many of you might have experienced this. For example, dreaming someone has passed away, or feeling someone passed away in your dream, or or dreaming of someone and then they call you the next day. This kind of feeling, something that happens a lot, for instance, with twins. There's kind of more what's called paranormal aspects, and this is what he finishes on. This is for him the most interesting aspect. He says, "I do not dare express an opinion upon phenomena of this class, but I cannot avoid attaching some importance to the observations gathered by so rigorous a method and with such indefatigable zeal by the Society for Psychical Research. If telepathy influences our dreams, it is quite likely that in this profound slumber it would have the greatest chance to manifest itself. But I repeat, because he wants to keep his reputation, he says, I repeat, I cannot express an opinion upon this point. I have gone forward with you as far as I can. I stop upon the threshold of this mystery to explore the most secret depths of the unconscious and to labor in what I have just called the subsoil of the consciousness. That will be the principal task of psychology in the century which is opening. I do not doubt that wonderful discoveries await it there, as important perhaps as we have seen in preceding centuries, the discoveries of the physical and natural sciences." So that's really Bergson as a kind of phenomenologist and someone who's taking a much more skeptical, maybe not non-scientific approach, and much more existentialist, phenomenological approach. Trying to understand something from simply experience, unified experience. Here, I wanted to close this whole lecture with a focus on some of the scientific developments. It's quite interesting that we're seeing, in science, there's a development that does confirm different aspects of all these things that we have seen. The aspects of Aristotle, different parts of it are being confirmed constantly in different tests and experiments. So this is from a scientist, Bryony Shaw. She wrote a little paper 2016 that outlines some of the developments in the neuroscience of dreams. So she says, In 1953, dreams became more than a topic of conversation between philosophers, psychologists, and dreamers. A student and his professor in a sleep laboratory at the University of Chicago discovered rapid eye movement, REM. REM was discovered not to only be apparent during sleep, but it seemed to be connected with humans as they were dreaming. People were woken during periods of REM and asked to report on their dreams. In the years since the Kaspersky and Kleitman discovery, a considerable amount of dependable information has been gathered about the physiology of sleeping and of dreaming. It has been discovered since these experiments that dreaming does not only occur in REM sleep, so that actually is a refutation, if you remember, of John Locke. If you remember, John Locke had said, well, we only sleep when we only dream when we have these dream sleeps of REM. And when we're in deep sleep, we're not dreaming. But discoveries are finding that actually that's not true. And she goes on to say there are two types of sleep: REM sleep and non-REM sleep. In REM sleep, the body, in terms of breathing rate, blood pressure, and heart rate, match those of an awake person, but the muscles are frozen and there is rapid eye movement. Another name for REM sleep is paradoxical sleep, for obvious reasons. Paradoxical because it looks like you're awake, but your muscles are frozen and you're sleeping. But everything else seems to be awake. Your movement of eyes, fast, fast blood rate, breathing rate, etc. There are 4 different stages of sleep characterized by progressively slowing brain waves. If one is woken up during the deepest stage of sleep, or stage 4, then one would be very dazed and bewildered. People pass through the 4 stages of sleep between 4 and 6 times in the beginning of the night. There is less REM sleep, and then in the beginning of the night there is less REM sleep, and then as the night progresses there is more REM sleep, and mostly stage 2 sleep. This continues until the sleeper wakes up. More recent studies on dreams and dreaming have been focused on the memory aspect of dreaming. Llewellyn argues that the stuff of dreams is the stuff of memory. So again, very much coming back to what Freud and even Bergson were saying there. The author examines the function of sleep and dreaming as primarily one of organizing memory. Sleep promotes primarily the consolidation of memory, whereas memory encoding and retrieval take place most effectively during waking. Dreaming allows for the consolidation of memory to take place. And finally, here there's quite a few points that she outlined, but here's another one of these interesting breakthroughs in neuroscientific research, which again suggests something slightly closer to Bergson's view at the end there, that we're united as one, whether we're asleep or awake. There's no two worlds, no separation. And that's coming from Walker and van der Helm, who found that REM sleep affects mood when a human is in a depressed state. So he or she, according to the researchers, is more likely to have REM sleep with more negative memories being consolidated. A pathological increase in REM sleep, as commonly occurs in depression, may disproportionately amplify the strength of negative memories. When a human takes certain antidepressants, there is a corresponding decrease in REM sleep, therewith supporting a more positive mood. So that's again coming back to that maybe Bergsonian view, which is that everything is unified, that the active waking life can have impact on the dream, as some of the earlier philosophers were saying, but so too the dreaming life can have an impact on the waking life. And it's not so much that one has the impact on the other, but more what Bergson was saying, which is it's just one unified brain that is just acting at different speeds. It's slowing down, or it's going faster, or rather it's focusing when it's waking up. If you remember, he was talking about the focus and the use of memories and ideas towards specific goals, and then it turns off the engine and lets loose and goes into the dream state. So that's really quite a long little lecture here, but quite a few different things we cover um, in trying to give you a kind of broad sweep of thinking about dreaming. And I think you've seen that shift between dreams at the beginning in earlier human life being fundamentally tied to our reality. There was very little separation. In fact, dreams were seen as a window into a deeper reality that you could actually see into even the future, or see, if you remember the anthropologist who was examining African tribes, that you would actually be able to be warned of a fellow villager who had bad intentions towards you. And then as we switch over to what we saw the Enlightenment in Europe, starting with the ancient Greeks and then passing on to Enlightenment Europeans, you have this kind of dualist worldview where there's a real separation between the material, physical world that counts, that matters, where you can organize yourself, have reason, be moral, organize politics, organize economic, social life, etc. And the non-conscious world, the dream world, the imaginary world, and that was for them a very clear distinction. Then we see in the late times, in the post-Enlightenment period, especially after Freud's intervention, we see more of a bridge being created between that material physical world. So Freud doesn't actually throw out this dualism. He doesn't exactly say there is no dualism. Remember that the iceberg metaphor of Freud, that is often used to describe Freud's ideas, sees one iceberg but two states: the conscious state above the water and the unconscious ego and the subconscious activities underneath the water. And what Freud did contribute was to say, actually, these are both affecting each other. The memories you have in the real world, the physical world, the reality, are affecting what's going on in your dreams as they process. And processing the dreams, psychoanalysis can help you process your reality and understand your past and your future even. And then finally, we saw with Bergson and actually some of the more recent scientific research on this, the neuroscientific research. Actually, it's a much more unitary picture. Again, a post-enlightenment picture, one that does not really actually goes further in breaking down this dualism, and actually that dreams are not necessarily a separate world that we enter into, but rather a unified part of who we are, and that we kind of go through dreams in the same way that we go through life, that we are using dreams and welcoming dreams into our sleep in order to process our existence, our present. Although in that situation, when we're in dreams, we're processing what's happening in the dream in our rest state, as opposed to what's happening in our real active life state. So that, I hope you've enjoyed this lecture. It's the first of many, I hope. And take care, have nice, sweet dreams, and see you next time.
I have dreams